Ethan Clark woke up to the sound of marching boots and the faint smell of gun oil, a scent he hadn't known in years. The ceiling above him wasn't the sterile white of a hospital, it was the dull gray of the military barracks from his youth. His heart thundered in disbelief. He touched his chest, solid, strong, alive. He was no longer the dying man from that hospital bed. Somehow, impossibly, he had been reborn. Memories struck like lightning, the machines beeping in his final hours, Clare Bennett's tear-streaked face leaning close, not in grief, but in guilt. Her words had sliced through him. Ryan and I are getting married after your funeral. And Ryan, the man who had once been his best friend, stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder as if Ethan's death were nothing more than a convenience point. 30 years of devotion. 30 years of humiliation. Ethan had sacrificed everything, his youth, his career, his dignity, for a woman who had never truly loved him. He had mistaken obsession for loyalty, pity for affection. And in return, she had turned his love into her weapon, using him to wound another man. Now, staring at his reflection in the cracked mirror, Ethan's jaw tightened. The younger version of himself stared back, full of life and naivety, the same boy who would soon fall into Claire's trap again, unless he changed fate. Not this time. This time, he whispered, voice low and steady, I live for myself. No more chasing love that never existed. No more waiting for scraps of affection. Clare Bennett could play her games, but Ethan Clark was done being her pawn. As the morning trumpet called soldiers to assemble, Ethan buttoned his uniform and stepped outside. The air was sharp, filled with promise. For the first time in his 2 lives, he wasn't walking toward her, he was walking toward freedom. The midday sun beat down on the training field as Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow. The rhythmic chants of the soldiers echoed through the camp, until a voice broke through the noise. Private Clark. He turned, instinctively stiffening. Davis jogged toward him, slightly out of breath, clutching a lunch box wrapped neatly in a white cloth. Clare Bennett's here, Davis said, his tone caught between disbelief and awe. She said she made this for you herself. The name hit him like a cold blade. For a moment, the world around Ethan blurred, the laughter of the troops, the metallic scent of oil, the shimmer of heat. It was all replaced by memories of another lifetime, Claire standing at his door with the same sweet smile, holding the same homemade lunch. Back then, he had been thrilled, foolishly believing she cared. But later that day, Ryan had appeared, mocking him in front of everyone. She only pities you, Clark. You're just a stand-in. Ethan took a slow breath, his hand curling into a fist. Not again. He looked at Davis. Tell her I'm sick. I can't see her. Davis blinked. Sick? You look fine. Then tell her I caught something contagious, Ethan said flatly, turning back toward the training line. From the gate, a few soldiers were already whispering. Isn't that Clare Bennett? I thought Clark was crazy about her. Yeah, another murmured. He once skipped drills just to see her. Their curiosity only made Ethan's resolve harden. He remembered what came after, how his blind devotion had ruined not just his career, but his dignity. Minutes later, Davis returned, scratching his head. She looked disappointed, he said quietly. Said she'll come back tomorrow. Ethan gave a dry laugh, one without warmth. She won't have to. I'm not interested. Davis frowned. What happened to you, Clark? You used to light up when she showed up. I grew up, Ethan said simply. He picked up his rifle and walked toward the range, leaving the whispers behind. Inside, a storm brewed, pain, anger, and something sharper, clarity. For the first time in 2 lives, Ethan Clark had refused Clare Bennett. And though his heart ached, beneath the ache was something new, a quiet, liberating strength. A few days passed before the letter arrived, a delicate white envelope, the scent of lavender clinging to its edges. Ethan recognized the handwriting instantly. Clare Bennett. Inside were 2 concert tickets, her name printed elegantly on the program cover. Piano recital, Clare Bennett. His fingers froze midair. The scene was achingly familiar, the same stationery, the same graceful handwriting, even the same polite note, "I would be honored if you came." He remembered that night from his past life all too clearly. He had gone, of course, sitting nervously in the back row, watching her play under the soft glow of stage lights. For a moment, he had believed she was looking only at him. But when the performance ended, Ryan had appeared, smirking. "Didn't you get the hint, Clark? She invited me, not you." Claire had said nothing, only turning her eyes away as if ashamed to be seen with him. The humiliation had been complete now. Holding those same tickets again, Ethan let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Fate, it seemed, was testing him. That evening, he found Ryan in the barracks, leaning back on his bunk with a cigarette. "These are for you," Ethan said, tossing the envelope onto his lap. Ryan raised a brow. "Claire's recital? You're not going?" "No," Ethan replied simply, buttoning his uniform collar. "I'm done with that kind of entertainment." Ryan gave a half-smile, clearly intrigued. "You? Turning down Clare Bennett? You really have changed." "Maybe," Ethan said. "Or maybe I finally woke up." Ryan chuckled, pocketing the tickets. "Your loss, Clark. She asked about you, you know." Ethan didn't flinch. "Then you can tell her I wish her the best." Later that night, as the barracks lights dimmed, Ethan lay awake listening to the distant hum of the city. He could almost hear Claire's piano drifting through time, haunting, beautiful, but no longer meant for him. He turned onto his side, closing his eyes. This time, he wouldn't be the fool who walked willingly into heartbreak. Clare Bennett could play her music for someone else. Ethan Clark had already learned that the sweetest melodies could hide the sharpest lies. The night after the recital, the camp buzzed with gossip. Ryan had returned from Claire's performance, smug and satisfied, telling anyone who'd listen how beautiful she'd been, and how surprised she was that Ethan hadn't shown up. Ethan ignored it all, keeping his focus on the rifle range, where the steady rhythm of gunfire drowned out every unwanted thought. But the peace didn't last. Late that afternoon, Claire arrived at the base, dressed in a pale blue dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, eyes flashing with emotion. Even from a distance, Ethan could sense the storm brewing. "Ethan Clark," she called, her voice sharp. Soldiers turned, murmuring among themselves. Ethan's jaw tightened. He lowered his rifle and walked toward her, calm and deliberate, as if facing a mission he'd already survived once before. "Why didn't you come?" Claire demanded, stepping closer. "I sent you those tickets myself. And then I heard you gave them to Ryan." Ethan met her gaze steadily. "That's right." Her eyes widened. "Why would you do that?" "I invited you, not him." He gave a quiet, almost pitying smile. "Because I remember how this story ends, Claire. You don't invite me to make me feel special, you invite me to make Ryan jealous. I'm not playing that part anymore." She froze, her lips parting in disbelief. "That's not true." "You're twisting." "I'm not twisting anything," he interrupted softly, but his tone cut like steel. "You used me before, Claire. You knew how I felt, and you turned it into a game. I spent years thinking you just needed time. Turns out, you just needed an audience." Color drained from her face. "Ethan, you're wrong." "I never meant, I'm done," he said simply. "Whatever you think we had, it's over. There's nothing left for you to use." Claire reached for his arm, desperation flashing in her eyes. "Please, don't talk like that." He stepped back. "Then stop pretending you care." With that, Ethan turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the middle of the camp road, surrounded by the whispers of curious soldiers and the dying glow of twilight. For the first time, it wasn't Ethan who was left shattered. It was Clare. The following morning, the atmosphere in the barracks was unusually quiet. The soldiers, usually loud and joking after breakfast, were whispering instead. When Ethan walked in, every conversation seemed to pause for half a second before resuming in hushed tones. He didn't need to ask why. Clare had been at the gate again. Her eyes red, her expression hollow, like someone who hadn't slept all night. Even Davis, usually the first to gossip, seemed uneasy when he said, "She looked like she'd been crying." "What happened between you two, Clark?" Ethan didn't even glance up from cleaning his rifle. "Don't ask," he said curtly. Davis hesitated. "She seemed worried. Said she wanted to apologize." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then she should apologize to herself. Not me." The words came out colder than he intended, but he didn't take them back. He could still feel the ghost of her hand reaching for him the day before, the tremor in her voice when she said please. In another lifetime, that single word would have been enough to make him crumble. But not this time. Not again. When the rest of the squad filed out for drills, Davis lingered near the door. "She really seemed sincere," he muttered. Ethan finally looked up, eyes sharp. "From now on," he said, "don't mention her to me. Ever." Davis nodded, taken aback by the force in his voice, and left. Ethan sat in silence. The rhythmic click of metal against metal filled the room as he assembled his rifle piece by piece, something steady, mechanical, something that didn't lie. But inside, the turmoil churned. He told himself it was anger, anger at being used, anger at her tears that came too late. Yet beneath the fury, something softer lingered, the part of him that still remembered how she used to laugh when she thought no one was watching. He shut his eyes, gripping the rifle tighter. "Don't be fooled again," he warned himself. "Pity isn't love. Regret isn't redemption." Outside, Clare waited near the barracks gate, clutching the same white lunchbox she'd brought days ago. But Ethan never came out, and though she couldn't see him, Ethan stood inside, motionless, fighting a war far quieter, and far crueler, than the ones he'd fought on any battlefield. 3 days passed in uneasy silence. Clare stopped appearing at the gate, and for a brief moment, Ethan thought she had finally given up. The camp returned to its normal rhythm, drills at dawn, gun maintenance at noon, and laughter echoing through the mess hall. Ethan almost allowed himself to feel at peace. Then, one afternoon, Davis burst into the barracks, pale and panting. "Clark! You need to come to the infirmary, now. It's Clare. She passed out in town, and they brought her here. She keeps calling your name." Ethan froze. His first instinct wasn't concern, it was suspicion. He remembered another time, another life, when Clare had pulled the same stunt. Back then, she had fainted during a storm, and when he'd rushed to her side, she had looked up weakly and whispered, "I knew you'd come." Later, he learned she'd staged the whole thing to make Ryan jealous. Grinding his teeth, Ethan stood and followed Davis anyway. The infirmary smelled of antiseptic and warm linen. Clare lay on a cot, pale but breathing steadily, a damp cloth on her forehead. Her lashes fluttered when she sensed him. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling. He stopped at the foot of the bed, arms crossed. "You're awake. Good." She blinked at him, confusion flickering in her eyes. I came because the medic said you wouldn't stop saying my name," Ethan replied coolly. "If this is another one of your performances, I'm not interested." Her lower lip quivered. "You think I'm pretending?" "I know you are," he said flatly. "I've seen this play before." Tears welled up, rolling down her cheeks. "You've changed, Ethan. You used to care." He met her gaze without a trace of warmth. You're right. I used to care too much. I used to be a fool. She reached for his hand, but he stepped back. Rest, Claire. Whatever this is, it's not my concern anymore. Her sobs filled the quiet room as he turned and walked toward the door. For a moment, he paused, her voice breaking behind him like a ghost from another life, but Ethan didn't look back. This time, he didn't owe her anything, not his pity, not his forgiveness, and certainly not his heart. The days that followed blurred into a strange pattern, one Ethan hadn't expected. Ever since the incident at the infirmary, Clare Bennett seemed determined to appear everywhere he went. Every morning, when the soldiers gathered for breakfast, she was there by the gate, holding a lunchbox or a thermos of hot soup. When he returned from drills, she'd be sitting on a bench nearby, pretending to read while sneaking glances in his direction. "Private Clark," Davis whispered one morning, grinning. "She's here again. That's the third time this week." Ethan didn't even look up from his cleaning kit. "Ignore her. She brought you lunch. Then eat it yourself." Davis blinked. "You're serious?" Ethan gave a short, humorless laugh. "You think this is about food?" "She's just trying to prove she can still get a reaction out of me." But deep down, her persistence unsettled him. It wasn't like the Claire he remembered, the proud, confident girl who used affection as a weapon. This Claire looked softer, uncertain, even lost. Yet Ethan refused to believe it. He'd fallen for that look once before, and it had cost him 30 years of his life. When Claire invited him to another recital, he didn't even open the envelope. He handed it straight back. "Stop wasting your time, Claire. I'm not coming." Her eyes glimmered, not with anger, but with hurt. "Why are you being like this?" "Because I finally learned what you really are," he said, voice low. "And I'm not letting you drag me down again." That night, as he trained under the floodlights, he caught sight of her standing by the fence, her figure small against the dark horizon. She didn't call out, didn't move. Just watched him until the lights went out. Davis muttered, "She's not giving up." Ethan tightened his grip on the rifle. Let her waste her time. But as he lay awake later, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the image of her standing there in silence, shivering under the night wind. He told himself she was just acting, a spoiled girl bruised by rejection, and yet, a quiet doubt whispered at the back of his mind, what if, this time, she wasn't pretending? It happened on a Sunday afternoon, a rare break from training. The soldiers were gathered near the mess hall, trading jokes and polishing boots when a commotion stirred near the gate. Claire was there again. But this time, she wasn't holding soup or music sheets. She was carrying something carefully wrapped in brown paper, her fingers clutching it as though it were fragile. Ryan walked beside her, his usual arrogance in full display. Ethan felt the tension before she even spoke. "Ethan," Claire called softly, stepping forward. I made this for you." She unwrapped the package, revealing a hand-knitted sweater, navy blue, thick, and uneven in places, clearly made by someone unpracticed. For a moment, even the soldiers nearby went silent. Ethan stared at it, emotionless. That color. That exact shade of navy, she'd chosen it once before. He remembered the same sweater in his past life, given with a smile and a lie. Back then, he'd worn it proudly, only to overhear her telling Ryan that she'd made it for Ethan out of pity. Now, the scene repeated itself, but with one crucial difference. Ryan's face darkened. "Claire, what the hell are you doing?" he hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You made that for him?" Claire turned to him, her eyes flaring. "Yes. I did." Ryan laughed bitterly. "You're making a fool of yourself. You think this guy cares about you?" I don't need your permission to be kind to someone, Claire snapped, her voice trembling but firm. I have the right to give a gift to whoever I want. A hush fell over the group. For the first time, Ethan saw her stand up to Ryan, the man she'd once chased, the man she'd once chosen over him, but instead of triumph, all Ethan felt was exhaustion. He looked at the sweater one last time, then shook his head. Take it back, Claire. I don't need it. Her expression crumbled. Please, he turned away before she could finish, walking toward the barracks without looking back. Behind him, Ryan muttered something cruel, Claire's voice breaking in protest. But Ethan didn't care anymore. Once, that scene would have destroyed him. Now, it only confirmed what he already knew. Even if Claire was changing, it was far too late for him to believe it. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The sound of the wind brushing past the barracks window became the rhythm of his memories, soft, haunting, relentless. He dreamed again. But this time, it wasn't a normal dream, it was a door opening into his past life, the one he had tried so hard to forget. He saw himself years ago, standing in the cold courtyard of the Clare family home, holding a small velvet box. His hands were trembling, not from the chill but from hope. Inside the box was a modest ring, one he'd bought with months of savings from the army. He had come 3 times before. Each time, her parents welcomed him warmly, grateful for his sincerity. Each time, Claire sat silently beside them, eyes lowered, her fingers gripping the edge of her teacup. Claire, he had said back then, his voice shaking. Will you marry me? No rejection. No acceptance. Just silence, and that silence had been worse than any refusal. Later, he learned the truth, that her heart had always belonged to Ryan, the ambitious soldier who left the army to chase wealth. Ryan had promised her a better life, a glittering world far away from the discipline and poverty of military living, but Ryan never came back. He remembered the day Claire came to him, her eyes red, her voice trembling with accusation. He left because of you, she screamed. You told him to stay away from me, didn't you? You couldn't stand to see me happy. He hadn't. But she never believed him, and when she finally agreed to marry him, it wasn't love that drove her decision, it was anger, resentment, and the desire to hurt him the way she'd been hurt. He remembered her standing beside him at their wedding, her veil trembling as tears slipped down her cheeks, not tears of joy, but of mourning. From that moment, their marriage became a quiet battlefield. Every word she spoke was laced with bitterness, every glance a reminder that he was the replacement for someone else. As Ethan lay in bed now, the memories seared through him like fire. He understood something cruel. In that life, he had loved her with all he had, but in hers, he had been nothing more than the shadow of a man she lost. The memory burned like acid. Ethan remembered the long, bitter years that followed their wedding, a marriage built on duty and resentment rather than love. Claire wore her wedding ring like a shackle, and her smile, when it appeared, never reached her eyes. Every dinner was quiet, the clinking of chopsticks echoing through a house that felt more like a prison. She never shouted, never argued, but her silence was sharper than any blade. And whenever she spoke of Ryan, her voice softened in a way it never did for Ethan. At first, he told himself it didn't matter. He would love for both of them. He would make her forget that man, even if it took a lifetime. But that lifetime slowly turned to dust. Their daughter, Lily, became the bridge between them, or so he thought. But one evening, when Lily was barely learning her alphabet, Claire sat beside her, guiding her small hand across the paper. Claire said gently, smiling for the first time that day. R for Ryan. Ethan froze in the doorway. His chest tightened, but he said nothing. What could he say? That her mother was wrong? That the hero she worshipped was a man who abandoned them both. He endured. Year after year, he endured, the lonely birthdays, the empty anniversaries, the quiet humiliation of being compared to a ghost who never came back. He grew old waiting for something, a moment, a glance, a word, that would tell him Claire finally understood. But it never came. Even when he fell ill, weak and pale, lying on the hospital bed, she didn't weep for him. Instead, she sat beside Ryan, now a wealthy widower, her hand resting lightly on his. "I suppose we wasted too much time apart," she whispered to Ryan, right beside Ethan's dying breath. He heard it. Every word. When he closed his eyes for the last time, it wasn't pain he felt, it was the hollow ache of realization. He had loved her for 30 years, and died as nothing more than a shadow in her story. When Ethan opened his eyes to the dawn of this second chance, he no longer felt the weight of longing, only purpose. The bitterness of the past had burned itself out, leaving behind a clear, sharp determination. He was done living as someone's pawn in a love story that had never been his. Instead of chasing Claire's shadow, he turned his focus inward. He filed for the GI Bill scholarship, a program that would let him pursue higher education after his service. MIT had always been a dream he'd buried under obligations and heartbreak. Now, he intended to make it real. The officers were surprised. "Clark, you sure about this?" "MIT's no joke," Davis teased one morning during drills. Ethan's lips lifted in a calm, confident smile. "I've wasted enough time being someone's fool. It's time I became someone worth being." Days turned into weeks, and his schedule filled with books, physical training, and applications. He studied late into the night under the dim glow of the barracks lamp, surrounded by silence and the faint scent of gun oil. Every page he turned felt like reclaiming a piece of his life. Then one afternoon, Claire appeared again, standing by the gates, holding a lunchbox just like before. Her face was pale, eyes searching. "Ethan, can we talk?" He looked at her, the ache of the past flickering faintly before dying away. "There's nothing left to say, Claire." Her voice trembled. "You've changed. You don't even look at me anymore." He adjusted his uniform, expression calm. "That's because I finally learned to look at myself." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but Ethan didn't waver. He had once thought her sadness would break him. Now, it only reminded him of the man he used to be. That night, as he sealed his scholarship application and wrote his personal statement, his thoughts were clear. "This life, I was going to live for myself." He folded the letter carefully and whispered to the silent room, "No more ghosts. No more regrets." Outside, the wind carried away the last echo of the man who had once loved Clare Bennett more than his own life. The wind outside the barracks carried a faint chill, the kind that whispered of endings and new beginnings. Ethan stood by the window, watching the first light of dawn break over the horizon, soft, golden, and alive. For the first time in both his lives, he felt weightless. He had learned the cruelest lesson love could teach, that devotion without dignity only leads to ruin. Once, he had given Claire every part of himself, his youth, his loyalty, his future, believing that love alone could change a heart. But love, he now understood, was never meant to be a form of self-destruction. The memories of his first life no longer haunted him, they had become lessons etched into his soul. The pity he once felt for Claire was replaced with quiet compassion, not for her, but for the man he used to be. He didn't seek revenge. He didn't want to make her suffer the way she made him suffer. Because in truth, she had already lost him. The version of Ethan who would have done anything for her no longer existed. What remained was a man reborn through pain, armed with self-respect and clarity. When he finally received the acceptance letter from MIT, Ethan smiled faintly. He packed his few belongings, folded his uniform neatly, and left the base without looking back. There was no dramatic farewell, no confrontation, no lingering goodbye. Just quiet freedom. As the train carried him toward a new city, he watched the landscape blur past, every tree, every stretch of sky a reminder that life could still be beautiful after heartbreak. In another life, he died waiting for love. In this one, he chose to live for peace. The story of Ethan Clarke was not one of revenge or regret, but of redemption. It was about finding the courage to walk away from what once defined him, to reclaim the self he had buried under years of devotion to the wrong person. And as the train disappeared into the distance, so did the last shadow of Clare Bennett. Sometimes, the bravest kind of love is the one you give back to yourself.